Good afternoon. My name is Jim Butler. I'm the Executive Director of the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and I have the pleasure today of introducing our first community meeting number 1 for our joint land use study that we are performing with the United States Naval Submarine Base, along with the 6 municipalities of Groton, City of Groton, both Groton Town and City, Ledyard, Montville, Waterford, and New London. The Council of Governments applied for a grant from the Office of Economic Assistance from the United States Department of Defense about 9 months ago. And the United States Navy had nominated this submarine base here in Groton for what's called a joint land use study. And I'm going to let our consultants talk about that and what a joint land use study is in a minute. But we were fortunate to hire a very experienced consultant team that have done this type of study around the country previously. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Julie Bassick, our project manager from our lead consultant, Makers, out of Seattle, Washington.
Thank you very much, Jim. Great to see all of you. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I'm Julie Bassick with Makers. I am the project manager for the JLUS study, and we're going to tell you a little bit about what a JLUS is, and then spend most of our time today talking about existing conditions and initial set of issues we've identified today. So I'm going to turn the light off, and I'm also going to let my team introduce themselves when they speak today, so that they'll be on the microphone so people who will know who's talking. Okay, so as I mentioned, the majority of the time today will be to review the initial set of issues that we've identified in the project after we tell you a little bit about what the project is and why it's important and why we're excited to be involved. The thing to remember is the main purpose of our talk today is to make sure that this initial set of issues is the right grouping of issues that are really relevant to help support the base's continued viability to operate in the area, as well as the communities that surround the base, the continued economic vitality of those areas. So are these the right issues we've identified? Let's make sure we understand the details of those issues. Could some be deleted? They're really not relevant for this study. And then which ones are your priorities? So that's our goal for today. What is a joint land use study, or a JLUS? It is a tool to promote compatible development. It's a cooperative effort between the military and a number of surrounding jurisdictions, and initiated, as Jim mentioned, by the nomination from the military department. There is technical and financial assistance provided by the Office of Economic Adjustment. And it's really, the process is about all of the communities and the naval installation working together. And its product, is to have a comprehensive plan that identifies the issues, and then the strategies that all the communities and the base will work together to mitigate those issues over time. This is not a new program. There have been 130 completed JLUSs as of last year. So this is about a 20-year-old. The program started in the 80s, and it really came out of a desire of the military to protect their operations in areas where incompatible land use was really affecting their ability to operate. The sort of poster child example is around Oceana, so the Naval Air Station there. Many housing developments and residential developments have encroached in the area that the base operates over time. And so now, because of noise and other concerns, the base is not able to continue to do everything that it would like to do out of that installation. So this is a proactive effort for the communities around Subbase New London to make sure that that kind of situation does not occur here. So, what again is a JLUS, or in more simple terms, it is a study that seeks to maintain compatible development around the military installation. It's collaborative, and it will end up being a document that supports good decision-making and continued collaborative action over time. What is a JLUS not, or there are things that a JLUS does not do, and this is really important to emphasize. It does not change any land use decisions or requirements in any jurisdiction through the JLUS. So it might recommend that jurisdictions consider amendments to their plans or zones in the future, but the JLUS itself does not take that action. It does not authorize or evaluate any new military activities, so there's nothing about this project that is intended to let you know that the base, is going to do different things in the future. That's not here, what we're doing. Nor does it do environmental review or zoning review of any particular project or action. Does that make sense? Okay. So this JLUS has a number of players, so being managed by CCOG, Jim Butler's team, involving primarily Subbase New London, Town and City of Groton, City of New London, Town of Waterford, Town of Ledyard, and Town of Montville. So those are the jurisdictions that are participating and contributing in terms of their time to this effort. The effort is overseen by two committees, a policy committee and a technical committee, that are populated by representatives from each of those municipalities, the COG and the subbase. In addition, those committees have members that represent other interested stakeholders, such as local tribal governments, large employers such as Electric Boat, Connecticut College, our friends at the Coast Guard, and including the Coast Guard Academy, state representatives, as well as federal agencies and state departments that are interested or through their missions affect compatibility in the area. This is our project timeline. It's basically all the JLUSs are set up in a similar way as structured coming from OEA, the funder of the program. The first phase, we do existing conditions and issue identification. That's where we are, and this is our first major checkpoint with the public and with our committees about that list of issues. So that's where we are today. The next phase is called conflict and compatibility analysis, and that's where we really make sure that now we've got some input from you all. We're going to refine that list of issues, make sure we understand it, and start to develop recommendations or strategies that the jurisdictions, the municipalities, and the naval base and the COG can work together to address those issues. That's in the next phase and will culminate in a presentation of conflict resolution strategies in August. Then we'll go through a cycle where we prepare a draft report, put it out for comment, refine it, and finalize it by the end of the year. So of note on this schedule, we are here at our first community meeting in late March. The next one will be to review, to issue your input on the refined list of issues as well as draft strategies, and that will be on May 31st, so you can mark your calendars. And then the final review with the community will be in late September when we go over our draft plan and what's included. Okay? So now, a little bit of context about the JLUS itself. So you all probably are experts on the history of the area and the base, but it's really a fascinating and important part of our history and culture in this area. Began as a naval yard in 1868. The first nuclear submarine, as you know, the Nautilus, launched from Groton. Today, it's the home of the Fast Attack Submarine Force. 15 attack submarines and 1/3 of the force are based in New London. And although we have not heard of any major plans to do anything different with the base, we have heard that there's continuing investment in the base to support that mission, as well as the evolution of the new and larger Virginia-class submarines that will be based here. It's quite a big facility, about 690 acres on the base with some acreage off. That's primarily family housing. In terms of employment, over 10,000 people are employed on the subbase, and of course, more than that in terms of family members and retirees. Most of the folks associated with the base live on base, though there are a number in the local community or in military family housing. One of the key features here that I'm sure you all are well aware of is that this base has twice been nominated for closure as part of the base realignment, and closure process. So, excuse me? Oh, okay, so 3 times. Thank you. 3 times survived the BRAC process. So noted, we will add that. And part of this effort is as part of the ongoing coalition of many, many stakeholders that rallied to the defense of the base in this area and have really worked hard to make sure the value of the base is known, and that you're working hard to protect it to ensure its long-range viability in this area. With that, I'm going to introduce Kevin, who's going to give you the economic overview and military economic impact.
Thank you. You can read the slides there, but basically the New London County economy is about $19 billion. $14 billion of that is personal income. And the largest employer, which is the government because it includes the casinos, as many of you know, is at 31,000, the healthcare, the manufacturing, and the subbase is 10,000. So the subbase in context as a source of employment matters quite a bit to the area. The study area, we looked at just the towns of the towns in the study area. They're 56% of the GDP, which translates to about $10.8 billion, $11 billion, 41% of the income. Shipbuilding, the shipbuilding sector, which is largely electric boat, as you can see there, generates more income than the next 12 sectors combined. So not only does the sub base matter, but electric boat and the shipbuilding side of it matters a lot as well. And the chart here will allow you to see what the number of employment and what the income is. The economic impact, we ran what's known as an in-plan model, which is an input-output model. It consists of identifying 3 forms of economic impact. The first is direct impact, which is usually the wages of the actual employer itself. The indirect impact is the expenditures of the entity on supplies and things like that. And then the third one, which is the induced effect, which is the result of the spending on employers and by its employees that gets created by the people whose goods were purchased. So it's their employees. And you can see how it stacks. There's about $714 million worth of activity. So translated back to the GDP, that's about 6.5%. You can see what the payroll, the military payroll and the civilian payroll. I will tell you that excludes, in case somebody's wondering, it excludes the retirees because the way the retirees are assigned, retirees are assigned based upon being within 40 miles of the base. As opposed to being directly tied to the base. But those numbers combined create another 157 billion, so you're looking at about 5.7 billion. And then when you look at what electric boat's doing, the role of the base, and particularly the relationship between electric boat and the base to service the subs, is absolutely critical for the area. The Port of New London, there's been a major investment. There's been about $40 million. There was recently another announcement about it. It employs 85 people. It also has a really important role in the commercial fishing industry in the area, which is in our more detailed report. A couple things we want to talk about industry performance. What's happened is we like to look at establishments because establishments give you an idea of what's going on with businesses. Whereas employment is about what's happening within a business. And what's happened is that their construction has been declined, but the firms have actually gotten bigger. The reverse has happened with professional technical services, which is things like lawyers, accountants, advertising people, graphic designers, is there are now more people, but they're smaller, but they're making more money than they have before. And then the retail and hospitality sectors, which is something that's really, really important. They're dependent upon 2 things. One is they're obviously dependent upon tourism, but they're dependent upon the health of all of the other sectors of the economy because they are the result of other people's spending. We also wanted to look, just to give you an idea of the context of the housing market performance. The chart on my right, far right, is what's known as the OFIO Housing Market Price Index. And what that measures is the change in housing prices for the same house as it's gone through a purchase, or if it's gone through a refinancing and what its appraised value is. So it's a different measure. It's a different measure than what you typically see when you look at a housing study, which is what the median home price is, because the median home price represents what's on the market at the time. What this represents is the change in value for the same house. And it's measured by what's actually been underwritten from a mortgage. So the OFIO actually comes through an organization like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or an organization like that. And then, so you can see that basically it's still below its 2006, 2007 levels. So one could imagine if there was something that would happen to Electric Boat or the Navy base, what that impact that would have on the housing market. It would take a market that's already very soft and make it even softer. Conversely, on the rental housing has been going up. I wouldn't use the word exponentially, but it's not insignificantly. Julie. Susan? I think this is
Okay, my name is Susan Van Schoten, and I own a house in this area, so that chart I paid special attention to. I am the president of Fitzgerald and Halliday, and my specialty is transportation, so I'm up to talk about the transportation issues that we have identified for this study area. I did want to talk about how we define issues for this type of a study. This is not the universe of every issue that's out there in southeastern Connecticut. These are issues of how the subbase relates to the neighboring communities. So it's a much more narrow look at issues, and that's true for transportation as well as some of the other issues that will be talked about in the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to start with transportation. We are going to talk about land use development, Thames River, and other coordination issues. Other parts of the team members of the team will talk about that. The first issue that we have identified through our interviews with the subbase personnel, with the various communities, as well as our knowledge of the area and my particular knowledge of the area living here, is right here, the entrance to the subbase itself. And again, this is the interface between the subbase and the community with respect to transportation. The first is that we know Crystal Lake Road is basically the driveway to the subbase. Two of the main entrances to the subbase are right off of that. And we heard a lot about congestion there. We heard about truck congestion in the morning before the gate opens, how the trucks all queue up and oftentimes to Route 12. Also vehicle congestion. And that is worse when there's an event or a closure on the base. It is amplified. We do know that there are planned improvements that should be built for Crystal Lake Road I think it's supposed to be done at the end of 2018. We believe that there are some opportunities. This is a picture of it actually right here, the plan. Ooh, sorry. I'm trying to press the, anyway, that's the picture of it right there. We think there are more opportunities to enhance that into the future, particularly for transit, for walking, for other interface issues with respect to transportation right on the edge of the base itself, but outside the gate. We also heard about some concerns. We've been hearing about these concerns for a long time about other development in the area and how that's going to affect traffic, particularly on Route 12. Some of those, this is, I actually think, a picture of the Norwich State Hospital, which has had many, many different possible redevelopment themes through the years. But there's a recognition that if that was to be developed, particularly in some kind of an intense way, that would affect traffic volume on Route 12 and perhaps have some type of conflict with getting to and from the base. So that is something that we are aware of. And that also with respect to what's happening at Electric Boat. Now, this is an interesting study. I'm learning a lot about JLUSs from Julie. Electric Boat and the subbase have great synergy, and what Electric Boat does isn't everything they do doesn't necessarily end up at the subbase. Some of the other subs go elsewhere, but they're so closely related that we want to look at what's happening in Electric Boat. And what we understand and what we heard is that there's a lot of growth and employment anticipated. And so how does this affect the area. Clearly, it's going to generate more traffic demand, it's going to generate more parking demand. We heard about the parking in residential backyards in Groton. I'm going to confess, I worked at Electric Boat. I parked in one of those backyards in the mid-'80s. I actually commuted with who is now my husband. I met him commuting to Electric Boat, so I happen to think it's a great thing, but it's just a little story. But there's parking in the residential backyards, and that is because some of the parking at the time, and that was in EB's heyday, you had to park pretty far off and take a shuttle or walk up the hill. So that was something that happened and might continue to happen on a bigger basis as EB starts to grow again. So that's something to keep an eye on. We also heard about truck traffic, particularly down in the southern end of the campus. The trucks come, they drop off whatever they're doing, and then they loop around through the neighborhood. And so we need to be conscious if that activity starts to increase, how to make sure that there is truck routes, appropriate truck routes, so that we can minimize the impacts of EB to the neighborhoods. In terms of transit, we heard a lot about opportunities more than anything in terms of transit. There is a shared interest in better transit in the area. We know well, first of all, I'm going to say this area has a lot of transit modes, more than most. We've got Amtrak, we've got commuter rail, we've got the seat bus system, we've got ferries. Not all, and New London is a hub for a lot of that. That's a great resource to build onto, but we did hear that the bus frequency, it's like a 2-hour headway serving the subbase, not a lot of use. It's just not a real practical way to get around, particularly when it's pretty easy to drive around here. So there's great opportunity to enhance that. The biggest concern is money. We all know that there is a skinny budget out there right now that's not real friendly to transit, and that should be a concern for us. Perhaps there's an opportunity because it's serving a military base. We talked about destination shuttles. Perhaps the interface between EB and the subbase, there may be some way to shuttle between, and adding on to that concept of the shuttling from the parking lots. We heard about the water taxi that's operating in the summer now between New London and Groton, and the thought of adding a third leg up to the museum, the Nautilus Museum, and how can that possibly be enhanced in the future. So I think there's real opportunities here to enhance transit, and when demand gets greater, that's when you actually have more ridership and you can justify some of those expenses. And finally, pedestrian and bicycle access. We basically noted that there's not great pedestrian and bicycle access to the subbase. There are some sidewalks. It's not the greatest environment to be walking on Route 12. A lot of traffic, not a lot of buffer from a very hostile environment to be walking, but there is a sidewalk. But we really believe that there's shared interest in enhancing biking and walking in the area, and we know that a lot of the folks that live on the bay, some of the younger, I don't know what rank they are, but either don't have cars or really want other ways to get around. So this is a great opportunity as well, both in walking and biking. And I think, Bob, you're up.
So my name's Bob Bingford, also with Makers. I'm a partner at the firm. What I focus on is doing community plans, various city of all sizes, and also a lot of development regulations and zoning codes. And what I did want to mention is the outcome of this JLUS process would be a set of policy recommendations. There will be, for instance, no zoning changes or direct changes that come out of this. So it's a set of policy recommendations that then the various governments and agencies might use to help them make changes or specific actions. So that's important, specifically as we look at some of the land use and development types of issues related to the base. So the first that's good to mention, right across Crystal Lake Road from the base, there's a number of sites there that are undeveloped and they could be developed. And we've heard that there's a shared interest there. Obviously, it's right across from the base, so the base has an interest in what might go on that property when it is developed. So I think there's a desire that when something does go in there, that it be a compatible type of use, but also that it's supportive of what the town would like to have. So I think there's a desire that it looks good, but also serves both the base personnel and the surrounding community itself. Another area is along that whole Route 12 from Interstate 95 to the base, and we've heard that that area has improved over the years, and so I think there's a desire to continue to improve that. Some of the improvements that Susan talked about, at least on that northern stretch, will improve things. So I think there's a desire to continually to improve that that area along 12. Another very important, maybe one of the more important issues, particularly to the Navy, are the views perhaps into the base from the area in Waterford directly across. So as many of you know, there's a development there that was put in many years ago, and 30 years ago, with views directly, thank you, directly into the base. And we do understand there are some other sites that could be developed there. So we've talking with the town of Waterford planners there, and clearly there's been a lot of communication between the base and folks there, and so I think there's a desire to continue that and to monitor that situation. Housing, obviously, Kevin talked about a little bit with historically with the influx of personnel on the base, and also with EB, and particularly now with the planned influx of workers at EB, there's obviously a need to provide housing for those folks. So not only the number of housing, but also the types of housing. And there's a shared interest, obviously, with the town and the city and the surrounding municipalities to try to provide for that housing to support economic development goals and community development goals with the housing development. Now the river, and again, Kevin talked a bit about some of the economic issues with the riverfront. I believe there's a shared interest there with the Navy and the communities for promoting economic vitality, the waterfront areas, trying to support water-dependent uses there, and also looking at enhancing the opportunities for residents and tourists to experience the river on both sides of the river. Also, with the riverfront uses, obviously with over time, when there is increased waterfront development and marine activity, there's a potential to have impacts on the sub-base missions and security. A lot of this comes down to education quite often. And another issue that's been brought up, particularly with the new class of the Virginia submarines, which I understand are about 85 feet longer than many of the existing submarines. So that brings about the need to have a wider turning radius. And you can kind of see there with the marina directly across that there's some potential impacts that has. So there's ability to need to have that turning radius there to be able to support those larger class of submarines. Also, dredging is an issue. Dredging needs to be done every 15 to 20 years to support both the Navy, but there's a shared interest with the other waterfront dependent businesses on both sides of the river there. But one of the issues is with dredging. Dredging materials, it requires a number of permits and a disposal site. There's a potential that could become more complicated and costly over time. Environmental protection is another obviously shared interest with both the Navy and the surrounding communities, a desire to preserve those sensitive ecological impacts. The previous map on here, for example, looked at some of the shellfish activities that are occurring along the river. So a desire to make sure that there's a continued resurgence of those shellfish beds, and there's a potential that those could be impacted by the dredging, and obviously a need to balance conservation with regional development. Climate change is one of those other shared interest types of issues, and mostly along the riverfront, what this comes down to is the need to have adaptable infrastructure, and this is something that the Navy has already been doing, as in every Navy has been upgrading their piers, making sure that those are built up higher to be able to adapt to seawater rise, for instance. So it's obviously an issue that the town and the city will deal with along the waterfront, or EB facilities, to be adaptable to any change there. Another issue that we talked about, particularly here with the town and the city, there's a web of interconnected coordination and shared utilities and services between the Navy and the surrounding communities. And for the most part, we understand that things are working pretty well, that there's good sharing and coordination there, and beneficial arrangements, but obviously a need to continue that coordination. And so it's our role to make sure that we understand these issues a bit. In fact, there's not too much of an issue here, but clearly a need to continue that coordination. One issue we have received, I understand, about 90 survey responses so far from the online survey. And I understand one of the issues that's been brought up is with the Navy-owned housing off the base, that the local municipalities don't collect any property taxes from that Navy-owned land. And so that is a little, obviously, with the need for the municipalities to collect funding for schools and other services, that can be an issue, and it's something that's been brought up in the survey a few times. So with that, actually, I was going to have Joe Ming from our office talk a little bit about staying involved and how to participate with this. And obviously, after that, we have plenty of time here to stick around and for questions and answers and work on these surveys.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me? So my name is Joe Ming and I'm with Makers. I'm here to talk about the survey that we have online, as well as the dot exercise that we have at the back of the room. So the online survey, it's open right now, and it's going to be open until May the 1st. You can fill it out in a number of ways. You can either do it at the tablet at the back of the room. You can also fill it out online on your computer, or even your smartphone. And we have these small business cards that you can use that has the address on it. And we also have hard copies if you feel more comfortable with paper. And then in terms of the dot exercise, we have a number of boards at the back of the room. And when you came in, you should have received a bunch of dots. There's 4 dots for each person. And we were hoping to gather your input to see that for you to help us better understand and prioritize the issues that we've described today. So you can either vote on the issue by putting a dot, or you can put multiple dots if you think it's a really important issue. And I think that's it for the survey and the dot exercise.
Okay, so that concludes our presentation. We are here until 3:30 to answer questions. I want to mention a couple other quick things. So you've got your 4 dots. We'd love to get your input that way, and we'd love for you to do the survey. Also, though, as I mentioned at the outset, the role for this set of meetings is for us to really understand, are these the issues? Did we miss anything? And did we, if in fact this is an issue that we should be looking at in the study, do we understand it properly? Are we missing some facts or information? So that's where we'd really like you to use the Post-its or the big pad back there to let us know, hey, you guys may have the right title here, but you're missing exactly what you need to understand about what the conflict is or the potential for conflict. So there's that. And then also, I wanted to encourage you all, especially those of you from local municipalities, to take those business cards. The intention for those is that you take them back to your home office or to give to your friends. I know at your dinner party, you're going to want to tell them about the JLUS and have them fill out a survey. But we'd appreciate you spreading the word in whatever way is easiest for you and brought those cards to make it easy. I think Jim had a question or...
Related to that, would you just mention the website, which is on the COG's website, it's also, I hope, linked to our towns now, and they can provide input through the website, but also view documents.
Thank you. Jim had, I'm going to repeat that just for the microphone and our audience, that we do have a website, subbasenljlus.com. It's also, you may link to that as well as our survey through the COG's website or for the websites of the participating municipalities. So please go to the website through any of those sources, whatever's easiest for you. There's a place to sign up for project information there, as well as an avenue to just provide general comments or ask questions. Okay, with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.